Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this virtual field trip to a tiny forest in Witney in the UK. Before I begin, a word about ourselves. My colleague May and I are research interns at Earthwatch Europe, which is an environmental charity with science at its heart. We are environmental scientists working on urban biodiversity. Our mission is to connect people with the natural world, to monitor the health of our natural resources, and to inform the actions that will have the greatest positive impact. Our project is called Tiny Forest. It's a nature-based solution aiming to create more climate-resilient cities. How? Well, we plant dense, fast-growing native woodlands. We engage communities to plant and maintain and monitor the forest over time so that the forest becomes a meeting point and an educational resource. We encourage people to become citizen scientists, where we give them simple tools to gather data that contributes to understanding urban nature-based solutions and their role in developing climate-proof cities. On that note, let's begin. Today I'm going to take you on a field trip with me to one of my favorite tiny forests. We are in a small town called Witney, near Oxford, where I live in the UK. Forests come in many different shapes and sizes. Some are remote, inaccessible, some are highly managed, but the tiny forest is something different altogether. My name is Caroline. Hello. I'm joined by my friend Beth holding the camera, and it's a fine, crisp morning here in Witney. We've arrived in a quiet residential neighborhood. All of our tiny forests are in urban spaces, and we're looking for a bit of greenery. We arrive in Eton Close play area, a public space that residents use for recreation, walking their dogs, or playing football after school. We can hear lots of birds around. I think I can spot a few, but not many in this video. Earthwatch first came here 2 years ago to plant 600 native trees in a small area, 200 meters squared, the size of a tennis court. The ground was quite different on that day. It was very muddy, very boggy. The largest saplings that we planted there were less than a meter tall, and from here, I'm pretty sure they will have grown a lot taller than that. We've set off today to collect social and environmental data about this forest. We have some equipment waiting for us, and we have protocols to follow with simple instructions about how to collect data. This is called citizen science. Anyone and everyone can collect useful information at their doorstep. You don't need to be a scientist, you just need to be curious and observant. You can see my breath in the frosty air. The tiny forest in Witney was planted by volunteer groups and local residents in March 2020, just before the first lockdown. They planted oaks, elders, willow trees, hazels, maples, blackthorns. 12 different species in total were specifically selected to meet the environmental conditions of this site. A spoiler, the ground contains a lot of clay, so the species that we chose would appreciate the clay. Today is a monitoring day where it's all about enjoying the forest and watching it grow through our toolkit of citizen science. The forest has a gate to protect the young trees in the first couple of years, but the gate is never locked. The gate opens into a classroom area with benches for me to enjoy. Local schools use this space as an outdoor classroom area. Residents use it as a place to enjoy each other's company and get some fresh air. The space is COVID safe. It allows people to reconnect with each other and with nature, even in the restrictions of a pandemic. Time for a quick warm up. and let's go and find some trees. The trees in a tiny forest are planted very close to each other, only 30 centimeters apart. The design was developed by a Japanese botanist called Miyawaki in the 1970s as a way to replicate forest distribution found in natural undisturbed old-growth forests. Beth and I really need to watch out for the little branches. I get smacked in the face at one point. All good fun. First of all, here I am. I'm going to measure the amount of carbon from the atmosphere that a tiny forest can capture in above ground biomass. Carbon capture is one of the most common reasons why people are interested in a tiny forest because of the strong association with climate change. Carbon capture monitoring is designed to tell us how fast a tree grows and thus how much carbon it stores. The first thing I'm doing is checking this yellow tag ID. 1 in 6 trees in the tiny forest are tagged with a number from 1 to 100 for monitoring. With the data from 100 trees, we can get a nice sense of the carbon captured by a tiny forest. Because our tree planting method is unlike traditional methods around the UK, we have started to see trees growing very fast. They are already taller than the children who planted them 2 years ago. By collecting data every year, we'll be able to give solid evidence about how fast a tiny forest can grow. To calculate carbon capture, we simply measure the tree's height using a tape measure from the tallest branch towards the ground in a vertical line. Here I'm using a wooden cane to help me stabilize the tape, and as you can see, the tree is quite tall, so Beth has come to help me reach the bottom and read out the measurement to me. It was 2 meters and 68 centimeters. Not bad for a 2-year-old downy birch. When it's around 2 meters, it's still possible for me to use the tape measure, but at some point the tree will get very tall and we will primarily be using trigonometry and handy tools called clinometers to help us find the height of the tree. Now it's time to measure the diameter of the tree. So I have my caliper, which will give me an accurate measurement of the width of the stem. Using my cane, I find a 10 centimeter mark because I will be measuring my tree at 10 centimeters above the ground. So now I just put the cane next to the tree and then I find the 10 centimeter mark and measure from there. These calipers are digital, so they will show me a number in millimeters on the screen that I note down. If my tree had more than one stem, then I would measure all of them. Now I'm just checking to see that my tree is alive and well. And I found a friend, a little ladybird. I'm already starting to reconnect with nature and notice the little wonders of life like this bud. Collecting data for citizen science is not just about gathering information, but also about taking stock of your surroundings and feeling closer to your local environment. Now that I've had a go at collecting carbon capture, I would do this for all the other tagged trees, but not today. So I'll right now move on to flood management. This monitoring exercise is looking at how the soil is able to hold water after heavy rain or after a river overflows. Over the past 10 years in the UK, we've seen more and more frequent floods, especially in winter, so it's important to be prepared. The aim of this next survey is to find out how compact the soil is and what the soil is composed of. I start off by checking the soil survey conditions and scoring the soil based on how wet or dry it is. I have a scale from 0 to 3, where 0 is dry and 3 is very wet to the point of runoff. Today I would say it's dry. I'm rubbing off a layer of leaf litter and mulch that protects the tree roots and soil dwellers during the winter. I'll want to take a look at the soil underneath, but before I do that, I'm also going to record the weather conditions today. noticing any rain, checking the wind, and looking at the cloud cover. The sky was overcast but not rainy and with no wind. Here is a part where I'm going to measure infiltration rate. This means how fast water can soak into the soil. To do this, I'm using an infiltrometer, which is a white piece of piping you can see on the ground here. I've already stabilized it by hammering it into the ground. And I am making sure that I have my timer ready, and I'm going to pour 450 milliliters of water using my water bottle and start timing. Here I'm waiting to see how quickly the water absorbs into the ground. If after 10 minutes not all of the water has gone through, which is the case here, I measure the depth of water remaining using my ruler, and I note down that number in centimeters. From what I can see here, if there were a flood here in Witney, it's likely that the ground would remain flooded for a significant period of time. My next mission as I tidy up is to assess the color and texture of the soil. And I have my monitoring guide ready. Using my trowel, I'm going to scoop a small amount of soil beneath the leaf litter. It's quite a cold day, the ground is quite hard, but I am able to take about a teaspoon of soil and roll it into a small ball. I'm going to compare it to my color chart. I'm placing it on top of the soil chart so that I can easily see which color it most resembles. When I find the color block that matches my sample the most, I write down the code, which is made up of the column letter and the row number, J4. I also record which part of the forest this measurement comes from, either the middle or the edge of the forest. In this case, my sample is less than 2 meters away from the fence, so I record this measurement as being from the edge of the forest. Next, I'm going to do a soil texture analysis, where I scoop out another soil sample with my trowel and roll it into a ball. I then follow the steps on the soil texture flow diagram to find out what the soil is made of. I'm able to shape it into a ball, and the flow diagram tells me therefore that this is not 100% sand. I follow what's next and extend the ball into a sausage shape, and then see if I can push it into a ribbon without it breaking off. Here I'm able to make a nice long ribbon without breaking it. So there isn't much sand or silt in this soil. Then for my final test, I squeeze off a smaller amount between my fingers to check the texture of it. I'm checking for grittiness. And since I feel none, that means that my soil is almost entirely made up of clay. This is consistent with what I know about the region of Oxfordshire. Lots of clay found around here. So next I will measure soil compaction to find out whether the soil is tightly packed or soft and airy with lots of air pockets. The soil penetrometer has a white band that will move depending on how much pressure is needed to push the tip of the instrument half a centimeter into the ground. I see that the clay is fairly compact, but not too much to pose a threat to the growing roots. They'll be able to find lots of space to grow. And that's it for flood management. Soil sampling is the part that children enjoy the most, especially toddlers. They somehow end up covered in mud at the end of this activity. They really enjoy spending time here exploring the natural world outdoors. And that's the beauty of citizen science. It's accessible to young children as well as adults. There is something in it for everybody, and no one is required to necessarily know the Latin name of plants, although there is no harm in that. As we move through the dense forest, Beth and I really need to slalom through the branches. It's making us laugh. It's also making us see the diversity of tree species. Each one is slightly different from its neighbor. This was filmed in late January, so I wasn't expecting to see young buds. But I'm surprised that I do see some. I see some little trees pushing their way out. And what was I saying about muddy hands? It's part of the fun. I can see differences in the stems. Some have a distinct reddish tint like this dogwood, and some are lighter in color, and some are smooth, rougher. They make a nice community of trees together. Some more leaves. I'm making my way over to one of the 6 biodiversity tiles that we have dotted around the tiny forest. I've located a tile and I'm just going to see which number it is. Number 4. I'm looking for soil dwellers, which are all the creepy crawlies found in a native forest like ours. We only monitor biodiversity in spring. In fact, our biodiversity week is coming up on the last week of May, 21st to 29th of May 2022. And here's the reason why we don't measure biodiversity in winter. The soil is frozen, so the slab is sealed shut. I don't try too much because I know the ground dwellers are hibernating and they need the protection of their shelter under this biodiversity tile. What I would do in spring is to carefully lift up the tile and count the little creatures like ants, woodlice, centipedes, spiders, etc. I only monitor invertebrates at the group level rather than the species level to make it less complicated and more accessible too. If this were spring, I would now use my stopwatch to count as many butterflies as I could in 10 minutes. Follow the butterflies! But since we're not in spring, I know that I won't see any butterflies or pollinators today. But never fear, a tiny forest has so many benefits, and just being in one is great. We've seen that one of the main attractions of citizen science in our nature-based solutions is to bring people together and strengthen their sense of community. It's also a time for people to enjoy their local area in new ways by providing a rich green space to sit down, lie down, contemplate your life. In a busy world, in a virtual world, being present in the moment and being at peace is a great gift. We have found that it improves health and well-being, which is one of the reasons why we work closely with urban communities in deprived areas with challenging social conditions and with limited access to nature. In my opinion, the most significant contributions of a tiny forest are these social benefits. Time is up. This quiet time reminded me of outdoor yoga. Here I am doing a little sun salutation, feeling good, feeling refreshed. In that moment, I was enjoying a new appreciation for the quiet lives of little creatures. So I'm going off and foraging through the forest some more. With all its native trees, a tiny forest can support biodiversity by providing habitats and resources for a broad range of insects and animals. This tiny forest is shaped like a Pac-Man from the classic arcade game. It's circular with a triangular classroom area shaped like a pizza slice. The local residents chose this design and we helped them fit it within the existing green space away from pipes and cables and existing trees. We want to complement the existing space with our tiny forest. Time for some tea. There's nothing like a warm sip of tea in Britain, especially on a frosty winter morning, and I already feel warmer than I did when I started off this morning. I'm standing next to a weather station now to gather some quantitative and qualitative information on thermal comfort, which is how cool or warm we feel in a given setting. This weather station measures air temperature in degrees Celsius, it measures relative humidity as a percentage, and wind speed in kilometers per hour. And here's my monitoring sheet. We repeat these measurements inside and outside the forest, and sometimes one of the weather stations is brought further away, near built infrastructure like a wall or a road. We're trying to find out whether tiny forests reduce the heat island effect of urban environments. Tiny forests are always found in urban areas. They provide vital corridors or stepping stones for wildlife passing through a city. Part of our research at Earthwatch is to support city planners to develop and improve nature corridors in cities. Part of thermal comfort is thermal perception, meaning how cold or warm we feel. And I already feel colder outside of the tiny forest. Here you can see how nice and easy it is to read off the weather station interface. And since there is no wind, I do enjoy inventing some wind. All right, so here we are. We've monitored carbon capture of trees, flood management of the soil, biodiversity of little creatures, and thermal comfort of air temperature inside and outside the tiny forest in Witney. We've followed simple instructions and gathered a large spread of data on social and environmental benefits. I came to Witney because it's the closest one to where I live, but there are over 150 tiny forests across the UK, especially in areas of higher deprivation where we engage underserved communities who lack access to nature. We have a growing network of residents, local councils, schools, businesses, all getting involved with the local community. People come from many different walks of life, and they all seem to find something fascinating in a tiny forest. One of my favorite comments was from a young professor in economics who said, "There is no tree, there is a tree." That simple change made a big impression on him. I hope you enjoyed this virtual field trip and thank you for joining me. Special thanks to Beth for accompanying me in person and for May for her support in preparing this session. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our engagement team by sending an email to tinyforest@earthwatch.org.uk. Otherwise, May and I have a few minutes to open the floor to discussion. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.